What up, crew? Hello. So, first things first, who am I and what is this? My name's Cass. I'm a musician and a programmer. I've been making games and music for those games for over a decade. Today, we're going to be talking about my game, Dream Slayer, which I released in August 2023. I did literally everything on this game. I programmed the engine from scratch, I did all the art, and I made the music and the sound effects. The music is an element of the game that people bring up a lot. So here's some gameplay footage so you can hear it in action. Where's my mouse? Oh no! So, what if I told you, so the code that made that music is 137 lines of C#. So I'm literally just gonna walk you through it now. We're just gonna talk about it. So if you know C#, you know that 137 lines is not a lot. That's a lot of lines of Python. It's not a lot of lines of C#. So, I hate this. After the using and namespace setup, the first thing here kind of shows you the core of what I'm doing. So I made a bunch of stems in Ableton that are all 4 bars and they're all in the key of E minor. I exported them all. I loaded them into the game into different lists based on which part of the arrangement they correspond to. And how I made those breaks is another interesting tangent that's beyond the scope of this talk, but ask me afterwards, and I'll tell you all about it. And there's also an empty audio buffer called silence, which is for when I want to mute a track because I need to play just a bar of silence. So after that, this whole bit here in the constructor is going through all the files in the music folder that comes with the game and putting them in lists based on their file names. If you had a more advanced content pipeline, you could auto-generate metadata files to store even more information. But I'm just reading the file names because the only information that's there is what part of the arrangement they correspond to. And so this whole system depends on a feature of the Moonworks audio API. Moonworks is the framework that I was using to make this game engine. It was developed by my friend Evan Hemsley, who normally sits at that desk over there. And Evan's great. He's the best. And so he developed a feature for this thing called the sound sequence, which allows you to queue up multiple sounds, and it'll play them back in the order you put them in, gaplessly and clicklessly. It's really, really nice. And it's also pretty simple to implement. I could have done it myself, but he just happens to have also done it. And so you have all of these methods here, and we'll take a look at those in a second. But what this is I'm queuing up a pad, but not the drums or leads, so we can have an atmospheric intro. And then I also have it so half the time it includes the bass line in the intro and half the time that it doesn't. And then all these sound sequences have a callback on them called onSoundNeeded that will play when there's fewer than need sound threshold clips in the queue. So you can see that all of the need sound thresholds are 2. So whenever there's fewer than 2 sounds in the queue, stuff will play, or we'll call get drums, get pad, get bass, and get lead. They'll just do that automatically. It's really nice. So these are those callback methods. They're all one line. They use this get random item helper that I wrote 8 years ago and carry with me to every single project. It's just an extension to C#'s list type. And at the top is the helper method for on-queuing silence, which lets you pass in how many bars you want and which track you want to be silent. And then finally, we have this update method, which just handles setting the volume of the music based on the options menu. And this is not related to the subject of this talk, but I'm using an easing method here to set the volume, and that's because human hearing is logarithmic, but most volume setting APIs are linear. So on a scale from 0 to 1, you would think 0.5 is half as loud as 1.0, but actually 0.1 is half as loud as 1.0. And if you have to set the volume really, really low on your volume slider in order to get it to a tolerable volume, this is the problem. And way too few audio programmers know that this is a thing. So to quick recap, you just make a bunch of stem loops that are all the same length. You load them into lists. You put the loops in a queue at random, and then you're done. It's really, really, really simple. It's really easy. And this technique is capable of a lot more than I was showing here. Dreamslayer was a really simple game. I made it in like 6 months. I only scratched the surface of what's possible with this technique. So you can do all sorts of stuff. You can store metadata about like the key to like do smooth key changes and stuff like that. You can associate different characters or enemy types with specific loops or types of loops for like automatic leitmotifs, which is sick. You can associate specific instruments with or timbres with certain locations in your game and export stems of the same music being played with different instruments or you can make the music more intense when the player is close to death. You can do a lot of stuff if you encode metadata about what these stems are supposed to do. And then the cool thing about this is that I didn't have to use fmod or wise to do this. This is the actual point of this talk. I was able to achieve this entire thing with 137 lines of C#, and none of the features that I just mentioned would increase the complexity much more. Software like fmod and wise is complicated to use and really complicated to maintain because it has to serve every conceivable use case, which means it probably doesn't serve your specific use case very well. And custom tools can be substantially simpler while still letting you achieve the same things. And so if you're an audio person, learning to program can open up a whole world of exciting possibilities for you and your team and your game because you don't have to wrestle with terrible software in order to make it happen. And the thing is, if you're a programmer, you need to realize that the artists, the writers, the musicians, and the level designers you work with are the people who make the parts of the game that people actually connect with. Our job is supposed to be hard. So make great tools for the people you work with because great tools make great games.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any questions? I answered every question anyone could conceivably have. Yeah. The mixing stuff, so mixing was mainly done in Ableton, but also, I adjusted the volume in Ableton of the stems, and I didn't export them normalized. That was the main thing. You could also have code metadata about mixing, or you could do it in the engine. There's a lot of different approaches that you could take. The one that I took was just I didn't export the stems normalized. The question was, how did you handle mixing? And also the answer to that question is, as you could kind of tell, poorly. I was bad at mixing when I made that game. I'm better at mixing now.
Well, I guess I'm curious, in relation to the sound effects and stuff,
Yeah.
are you doing anything to duck music?
So I'm not doing anything in that clip. I wasn't doing anything to duck music and sound design. You're sort of in hell when you do that stuff because the player has complete control over the relative volume of the audio, the music, and the sound effects. So they can make it sound bad on purpose, and there's nothing you can do. There's nothing that I can do that much about that. But yeah, in that particular game, I wasn't doing anything, but I could have. No. No. All the loops are the same tempo. Oh, the tempo was, did you have any issues with tempo sync? And no, I didn't, because they're all 160 BPM. That's one thing I would change. I would make them much faster. But yeah, they're all 160 BPM, and the way that the audio API works, it plays them back gaplessly, so they never slip out of sync. I've had the game running for a really long time, and I've never run into an issue where the tracks slip out of sync. Yeah.